Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. I'm kind of excited about all this. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. This is a very special kind of time for me because I'm with Grace Agnew, and Grace and I were talking before we went on air how we met. And it was 12 years ago. Grace is at Rutgers University. Actually, here's the title. It's always better if I read the title. Grace Agnew, novelist of Sanctuary, which is a climate change dystopian new novel on climate change. She's also a special advisor for strategic initiatives and analytics, which I have no clue. I do have a clue, at Alexander Library at Rutgers University. So there's wonderful titles after Grace's name. We met 12 years ago in all the most unusual place, Facebook. We're two adults, and we found each other on Facebook, and it began a great friendship and some collaboration on assorted topics and things that we've done. And it's been a great collaboration, great friendship. A couple of years ago, remember you and I, Grace, we kind of took the train and we met at Book Expo.
Oh yeah, that was fun. Yeah.
And we kind of hung out at Book Expo because we both knew we were going to do some writing. But it's been a great adventure. And chronologically, we're a couple of days from Halloween, so people should know that. And I'm so excited that we can spend some time now and talk about your journeys, and more importantly, your book, which I had started, and I paid you a huge compliment in reading Sanctuary, that it kind of shook me to the roots, which is what it's supposed to do, because we're going to talk a lot now about climate change. So this my Johnny Carson monologue, I try to fashion it after Johnny Carson. It doesn't work out that way, but my Johnny Carson monologue is done, and why don't you do a little bit of a bio, and then we'll kind of jump into things. Take it away, Grace.
Okay, so as Calvin said, I work at Rutgers University. I've had numerous roles there, and I started at Rutgers in 2002, so right after, quite frankly, September 11th. So I've been here 19 years, and it's really been a really wonderful experience. I came from Atlanta, where I worked at Georgia Tech. So I've been an academic librarian most of my career. And early on, I tracked into technology and data in particular has always interested me. My earlier books are professional books, and they're books about data management and about digital rights over data. I was asked many years ago, I guess in the early to mid 90s, by the National Science Foundation to assist them through grant reviews and grant site visits as they were setting up enormous networks of sensor data that they're collecting to understand the changing circumstances of our planet. And while most of this data is not surprisingly collected in the United States, not all of it is. And so that really started me on my journey of climate science, because like a lot of you, I sort of kind of had heard, I kind of knew that maybe the world wasn't in the greatest shape. Certainly we had all seen air pollution. We all knew about air quality indexes that you looked at each morning. And living in big cities, as I frequently do, particularly in a city like Atlanta, which is pretty huge, I was aware of the air quality index. I visited California a lot. I saw the smog before all the smog went away. So I knew we weren't in great shape. I knew we could do a much better job as stewards. What I didn't really realize until I started meeting some of the best scientists in the country, people who are collecting and analyzing this sensor data, I didn't realize what perilous shape we really were in. And mind you, this is before Al Gore and his Inconvenient Truth. So it was a shock to me to learn that scientists were really concerned that human civilization and actually the entire ecosystem might not persist for another 100 years. You know, yes, I'm not going to live 100 years, and I don't really, you know, and I was already not, I hadn't just been born. So even if I was going to live 100 years, you know, I only had 30 or 40 left. But I didn't realize that you know, the kids that come after me and their children, you know, might have no future, or that their future might be, you know, pretty horrific, searching for a glass of water to get them through the day, for example. So I started really reading and studying climate change, and I got a lot of facts. I got a lot of information. What I didn't get was what you always want to find at the bottom of that factual box, which is that winged thing called hope. They weren't offering me a whole lot of hope. If we made drastic changes right away, and we never make drastic changes, you know, we could probably do okay. If we made gradual changes, we might still survive. But, you know, it's been 20 years since I first got interested in climate change. And frankly, our efforts to combat it have been minimal. So what that said to me was I really needed to understand what's it actually going to be like. Is there some cutoff date where we all just fall off a cliff and it's just all over? Is it gradual? Is there anything we can do? And so I started pushing these scientists, you know, after the meetings, at dinner, et cetera, when we had free time, you know, don't just tell me, you know, that it's a hellhole. Tell me what we can do, and tell me, you know, what are your predictions? What do you think? And I have to say, most of them still have a great deal of optimism. And the reason they do is they're scientists. They work in universities, and they know how smart we are as a species because they're among the smartest. And they know how quickly scientific discoveries happen. So despite the fact that we're not making the steps that we should, you know, we are going to persist. And so my book was really, the genesis of my book was really, what will that persistence look like? You know, what will it be like for us? What will it be for average people? And I don't pull a lot of punches in that book. I don't say it's all going to be okay. We're going to wake up. It was a bad dream. We're all fine now. It's not going to be when, you know, Dorothy woke up in Kansas in the movie where she's back in the sepia colored world, but it's still a recognizable world and it's all fine. It's going to be a different world. I really think that, you know, the people that inhabit that world are going to look back on how we lived, and they're just not even going to believe that people once lived that way. But on the other hand, we're adaptable, and we're going to adapt as we need to adapt, and we're going to fix as we need to fix. And so my book shows a way forward to fixing some of the things that we can still and probably always fix.
I should say, to plug what we're doing, Grace and I and a small group of people, in some cases with global influences, formed a little group called Climate Optimists, and which reinforces what Grace is saying about the direction of her book Sanctuary, with the word hope. And the Climate Optimists, and most of this group actually are writers and fiction writers and have expressed themselves. So it's an interesting group. Before we went on air, we talked about, you know, our next little panel discussion that we're going to be talking about fiction writers and climate change. But you know, I had mentioned this to Grace, and she jumped aboard like immediately. She's been a climate person for a long time. I became a climate person on April 22nd, 1970, the first Earth Day. I was a young guy and fresh out of school, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. You know, I would be driving. It didn't take a lot to kind of push me over the edge, so to speak. You know, I'd be driving on the Parkway, and it was bumper to bumper traffic. As far as the eye could see, there were cars. And I'm saying to myself, that's these cars are all spitting out, you know, the remnants of fossil fuels and carbon dioxide and all kinds of pollutants. It's overwhelming, and this is just one little corner, one little spot in the universe, our universe here on Earth. So these are some of the motivating things. But anyway, before climate, I just have to ask you, because you've done some amazing work. This is a little off the climate. We're going to go right back, but you've done. People should know that you've written. You've been a recipient of like $12 million in federal grants. Not easy to accomplish. You've done that.
Yes.
I mean, I don't need to know the process, but I mean, that's, you know, that's kind of like a badge of honor that you've been able to do that.
Well, I mean, the process is it's always a collaboration, and I've been fortunate at both Georgia Tech and Rutgers to work with some of the smartest people on the planet. And I co-author the grants, and I'm usually what's called a co-PI on the grants, and occasionally a PI. But and also people at Rutgers University libraries and Georgia Tech libraries, we've gotten grants to digitize important collections and things like that. So I would say that, that's always a collaboration. And so there are people that get grants all by themselves, but very few, and I'm certainly not one of them.
But that's great. The other thing, the other element to you and I is you had introduced me to the world at Alexander Library at Rutgers. I didn't know a lot at the time, and it was a slow introduction. And then I spent time there learning and meeting so many people, Sonia, and learning, and Karen, who works with the New Jersey Digital Newspaper Project.
Right.
And I know that one day I spent there where I was shown special collections, and I wrote a nice article for NJ Discover, and I came away through you and through the people I met, having a stereotypical view of a library, with the card index that when I was a little kid. And
I dropped one of those once in my first job.
Gosh.
About it,
yeah. But I walked away from that experience, the collected experiences of what you opened the door for me at Alexander Library, saying that a modern library at Rutgers University and is like an amusement park for the mind. That's what I came up with. I think some of you guys like that.
yeah.
But and that was an important element for me as my development as a journalist, to experience that and seen it and be able to express it. But anyway, I'm thanking you for that opportunity.
Well, I have to say, I think more librarians should be writers, and all of them, write in some aspect. Certainly at Rutgers, because we're all tenure, we're all faculty, and many of us are tenure track faculty, and we publish quite a bit. But librarians, combine two things. They have or several things. They have a really strong love for fact and for accuracy, and they want you to cite your sources and really be able to, you back up what you're saying with evidence. They're generalists. They know a lot about a lot of different things, and they know what they don't know, and they know when to refer you to someone else or when to go do the research themselves. And they're also really humanists, and we're all really other focused. We're very interested in what do you need to know, what's important to you. We're listening to what your question is, what your problem is, and wanting to solve that. So I think all of those make tremendous writers, those qualities.
And I agree. The individuals I met, so dynamic and so diverse, and I found truly the best word I could say to describe my experiences at Alexander and meeting everybody there, it was enthralling, because it was like, wow. Of course, I've always lobbied I'm joking, but it's not. I've always lobbied you guys to get that key for the basement, which I never got. But
Oh,
that's,
listen, the basement is flooded twice
I
now.
know, I know.
Warming, so we're, Sonia has valiantly moved all those collections are moving out of the basement and will never go back.
I would have just loved to just sat on a little stool and kind of
Right.
rolled around and absorbed what was there, took a few pictures. So maybe someday in some other form. So moving on, there's so much here on my notes you said something that kind of intrigued me. You and maybe you can kind of clarify. You said geography is destiny. And I heard that was the only time I heard it. I heard it from you. What does that mean?
Well, climate change is really going to be about geography. I mean, there is no one climate change impact because climate change is going, we have now micro and macro climates. I mean, we don't open our weather apps and look at what's going on in California and say, I bet that'll be the same for New Jersey. I mean, we have many, many macro and micro climates in the United States. And we even have like microclimates that are like little microcosms within a larger climate where only certain species are found and certain, plants grow and the like. So every part of of our planet is going to react differently to the stresses of climate change. And, we already have climate refugees. And when we think of climate refugees, we tend to think of people that live in developing countries that are island nations or, severe droughts in the sub-Sahara where people are, choking from lack of water or dying from lack of food. We don't think of ourselves in our comfortable American existence as being climate refugees. And yet I know several climate refugees, people who have had enough with being menaced by California wildfires. The people I know they've been fortunate that they haven't lost their homes, but they've had to evacuate several times. They have to have go bags. They have to take steps that other people may not take to make sure that their valuables are protected, that, that they have fireproof, boxes for wills and things like that. And they're tired of it. And so one of them is moving. And I said to her, that makes you a climate refugee. And she got kind of offended. She said, don't call me that, because the image is not very pleasant, of a climate refugee. But that's what you are when climate is already driving you out of where you would prefer to live, where your roots are, where your families are. You're a climate refugee. And so I think it's important for people to really pay attention to where they live. The nice thing about working in a university is I'm aware that most universities, particularly state-funded universities, are doing climate reports for their state governments. And that's true whether you're in a blue state or a red state. Everybody knows climate change is going to have a significant human and economic impact. So every university is being asked to provide, predictive data for governments to make, based decisions on. So most of that, a lot of that is publicly available on their websites. There's usually a Climate Change Institute, or you can check like the Department of Climatology or, whatever the equivalent title is for your local university. And you can usually find some predictive reports that will let you know what the climate is going to look like in 5, 10, 20, 30 years, where you live, and make some decisions accordingly. I think people should be thinking, if you're young and you're thinking about job hunting, you should be thinking about where you might want to live. I think everyone has seen the graphics, and they're very, compelling and interesting, that show New York City submerged, Miami, of course, submerged, Los Angeles submerged, and everybody thinks, well, I'll move 100 miles inland. But think about land that's been safely inland that is now coastal. They don't have animals and plants that are used to brackish or salt water. They're used to fresh water. So suddenly the water is brackish. We also don't have wetlands are very protective, and we have mangroves and wetlands around, major water areas now, but areas that were not next to water, that are suddenly next to water, don't have these facilities to kind of break, the flooding and et cetera that's going to emerge. So it's really hard to even say, how far inland would I have to move? The fact that you're not submerged is not enough. You have to ask, when something as cataclysmic as Miami going under the sea happens, what's it going to do 100 miles inland? Those are questions you have to ask. It's going to change weather patterns. We all know it's moister by the shore. I mean, we in New Jersey who live, have the most expansive coastline after California, we know that the shore is, damper, that it affects weather patterns. Sometimes it gives you more snow than we actually have in north central Jersey where I live. So if a body of water swallows up some of the land, it's going to have cataclysmic impacts well inland. So, there's no black and white. Well, here's the cutoff where New York is underwater, but I'll move, 50 miles upstream. It's not going to be as black and white as that. The impacts are going to be far reaching. But it also means that there are some climates, that will do better with climate change. And there are some impacts like the Dust Bowl where we actually do know strategies for reclaiming arid land. We've actually done that fairly successfully. And we also have strategies now for pulling water right out of the air when there's not sufficient rainfall. So there are places where we can, do some recovery. So every place is not going to be treated equally by climate change. The other thing I think we have to think about is we just have to really rethink our lifestyle. I mean, right now I'm living in a house that's very, very cool. It's in Plainfield, New Jersey, and I'm in the upstairs in a, a small efficiency apartment in one of these beautiful Victorian mansions. And I mean, the mansion is incredible. And my landlady has been able to carve out multiple pieces of it into these separate rentals because it's huge. And it's shocking to me to think that that used to be middle class. To us, to have that many rooms and that many stories and all that gingerbread, even if you have a dozen servants, that still seemed like an upper class lifestyle, but it wasn't. Back then it was middle class. Today, the middle class has 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. The next middle class, the middle class of if not your son, your granddaughter, they're going to have flexible mobile housing that they can take and move if the land that they're living on doesn't stay, climate change effects are going to be cascading, and even as we mitigate them, some of them we can't turn back. So people are going to need more flexible housing. That home that is my castle is not going to necessarily be what people are living with in 50 years. That being said, if we can just sort of accept that life is going to change and not, grieve too much for our past life, I think we can do very well. Indigenous people did very well with summer and winter homes. And, I think our days of artificial heat and air may be numbered. And how are we going to adapt? We're going to adapt by being able to move from place to place, following the climate, just like our forebears did. So what we have going for us is we are one of the smartest, well, probably the smartest, most flexible, and most able to envision and imagine and adapt species that ever existed. So that's going to work in our favor with climate change. But what we have to do even now is stop assuming that what constitutes the great life and the American dream is gonna, is if we lose it, that we have to mourn it, because we're going to lose it faster than we expected. And it's going to be within living memory that the stable brick house in the nice neighborhood where the kids play in the yard is not the common strategy for people in a world of climate change.
Whoa.
Flexibility is key. Adaptability is key.
Yes.
An adjustable lifestyle is key.
You said, one of the quotes you said about surviving, I liked what you said, we're better off than the dinosaurs.
Right.
Because we're smart, so to speak, we're smart. It's funny, you were talking about climate refugees, and about 15 years ago, I came up with a little joke it's not a joke, but it's kind of a joke, in recognition in my own way, even without a lot of scientific background. I knew about climate refugees, and I knew about how fast things were going to happen. So 15 years ago, I started joking to my world that in a few years, I'm going to be a multi-millionaire because my house, which is way in from the ocean, I'm going to have beachfront property. I said, I've been saying that for 15 years. It's a great joke. And people who hear it for the first time think it's hysterical. I don't mean it to be hysterical. I mean it to be scary. So I would say, I'm gonna be a multi-millionaire. I'm gonna have beachfront property for about 2 weeks, and then my house is gone. So for those 2 weeks, I'm gonna eat at the finest restaurants, and I'm gonna enjoy myself, and then I'm not gonna have a house.
Well, I used to assume that was my goal, was to retire by the ocean, because I love the ocean and I never had the opportunity to really live there. And I thought, well, that's where I'm going to retire. And I was, really looking at Tybee Island in Georgia. And, that's not a goal anymore. And I don't want to, I love water. I used to think if not by the ocean, then by a lake or by a river. No, I'm not living near any flowing water anymore, because flooding, I think, is going to be an ongoing problem. And, that occurs in my book. One of the things that drives people into the sanctuary is all the flooding. And I've been through a number of floods because I grew up in Louisiana, and also Atlanta has its share. And of course, New Jersey has more than its share. But I've had family, really disrupted by water. And we've had to pull up carpet, and, waterlogged carpet is like one of the worst things in the world. That's, a dead body weighs less than, a few square feet of waterlogged carpet. And the smell is horrendous. The underpinning, turns really mushy. It's a horrible thing. And if you go in most Louisiana homes, you're not going to find waterlogged carpet anymore. You're going to find linoleum and sometimes bare concrete, because you want flooring that's survivable from constant flooding. And flooding gets into everything. It destroys things you didn't think it would destroy. You go into a lot of Louisiana homes and there's nothing below 4 feet. Bookshelves are filled, only, the top few shelves, because people got tired of, throwing out all of their possessions. So flooding to me is, is unpleasant in its own way as fire. And, and I know lots of people who have died in floods. I mean, well, not personally, but I know of lots of people who have been flooded and died. We lost 21 people, I think it was, in New Jersey to Ida.
Yeah.
So I'm not living near water anymore. That's a shame to have to feel that way, but I do.
Off topic, Grace, just to kind of break things up. You're smiling. So here's the, it's a quick one answer. It's a one-word question, but I like it. It's one of my favorite questions. So excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with. And there may be a couple, whatever. It's a little provocative.
Well, I have to say, I'm a huge fan of Jane Goodall. I was really thrilled when she was given an honorary doctorate at Rutgers. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get a ticket to get in and hear her speak, but she's certainly one of my personal heroes.
Me too.
I really, have enjoyed the interviews I've been able to read with her. One thing I really appreciate is she's, she knows a lot about what's coming. She knows how imperiled her chimpanzees are, but she still maintains her optimism and believes that people will essentially do the right thing. And then the other person I would have to say is, although it would be hard not to want to just jump in my time machine with her and whisk her away, would be Anne Frank, or as her name is really pronounced, Anna Frank. She actually had a huge impact on me. I read her book when I was her age, 10. Wow. And we had a horrible minister at my church. I grew up in a very conservative Lutheran environment. And he said to me that he was a missionary, and he said that it was important. He was always collecting for the missions, because he said it's important that people have a chance to hear about Christ, because they won't go to heaven if they don't. And I was very concerned at the time that Anne Frank wasn't in heaven. And I asked him about it, and he said, no, she's not in heaven. And he said, but then she didn't have a chance to learn about Christ. And I said, well, that's not true. In her diary, she talks about some of her fellow schoolmates calling her a Christ killer. And he said, well, then if she learned about Christ and didn't convert, she's in hell. So I went to my mother, and my mother said, that's ridiculous. Anne Frank isn't in hell. But at the time, what I said to myself was, I don't want to belong to any religion that doesn't allow, that doesn't allow Anne Frank to be, when I die, the person I want to meet is Anne Frank. I don't care about meeting all these Christian ministaries. And it changed my view of religion, because I just didn't want to be a member of religion that would exclude anyone for something as capricious as not believing the same things I believe. So she's been a major influence on me.
Interesting.
I was lucky enough to do during COVID one of these wonderful, online tour of Anne Frank's Frankfurt, because she lived in Frankfurt her family lived in Frankfurt till she was like 9 or 10.
Right, and they moved.
She was actually, I guess, 12 when she wrote her book, so I was probably younger than her when I read it. But she had a great life there, and there were a lot of family photos that had turned up that showed, the kids playing in the parks and things like that. And of course, they had to flee to Amsterdam, but they were German, they weren't Dutch. But it made me happy to see that she did have a happy childhood, that she did have some happiness in her life, because we tend to assume her entire life was in that annex. And it was nice to see in the totality of her life that, very short life, some of it was actually quite happy.
Great answers. Really great answers. And you said something about Jane Goodall. In all my promos lately, for the last several weeks, I always include climate information, no matter whatever I'm doing. Even all my random interviews of people, I put climate on.
Good.
And one of the things I put is 1 trillion trees planted for Jane Goodall. She's got that site where she's encouraging the world to start planting 1 trillion trees, because that'll pull enough. If we can plant 1 trillion trees, we'll pull a lot of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
Right.
So she was just on Jimmy Fallon 2 nights ago, and she's just as elegant and amazing as ever. But I support her, and I promote the 1 trillion trees.
That's great.
So we're on the same wavelength, Grace.
Well, we always have been, Cal.
Moving along, there's so much, in my reading sanctuary, which I've started, and listening to some of your dialogues, the melting of ice caps, the permafrost, the birds disappearing. I mean, it's so overwhelming, yet you remain extremely positive, and that is great. That but what about the whole climate? What scares you the most, about everything that's descending upon us?
Well, probably the magnitude of it. I mean, I do believe some people will persist. I mentioned that in some interview or some group, and someone said, yeah, the rich. I actually don't think the rich are going to be the most likely, because they live in such a protective bubble. I mean, the daily annoyances that you and I have, we run out of toilet paper, we have to run to the store. They have so many assistants that make sure that that's just never an issue. So that's just not even an annoyance that's ever touched them. That leads to a fundamental lack of imagination and flexibility, I think. So it's really, I think, going to be the flexible and the people who don't get too attached to the present that are going to do the best. If you don't have an optimistic attitude, I think you're going to do poorly. There is always hope. There are always things we can do, and we should always be doing that. But that being said, it's it's the magnitude of it, the fact that, you know, COVID has been a tremendous crisis around the planet, and we might lose, what, 1/4% of the world's population to it. We're going to lose probably 20 to 30% of the world's population minimum to climate change. And some of those will be people we feel sorry about, but we don't know, that are in Africa or Pacific Island or whatever, but a lot of them are going to be people we know. And you know, and some of them are going to be, all of us are probably going to have shorter lives than we would have had if we hadn't had so many plastics, if we didn't have so much air pollution, if our water was better quality. You know, climate change is, I look at all my friends that live in California, and some of them have real, like, asthma and other issues, and it just really scares me, because even locking themselves in their homes is not protecting them from how bad their air quality is. So I worry about the shortened lives of people that are being exposed directly like that. But actually, all of us are being exposed to toxic air from, you know, from wildfires. So all of us are going to have, you know, years, maybe decades shaved off our lives. But some people are just going to die directly and immediately from the impacts of climate change. And the sheer numbers are going to be horrendous. And the only thing I can say is flexibility and attitude, the ability to surf the tidal wave that's coming at us rather than just be submerged in it, is going to be, I say that to young people all the time. You can't spend your life just total in denial and fear. You have to be learning, but learning with an optimistic attitude that I'm going to make my life work regardless of what the climate throws at me, because those are the people that are going to survive. And you know, one thing about us, we adapt fairly readily to a new normal. We all adapted to being locked in with COVID fairly quickly. We all, you know, there were funny memes, jokes about, I thought the world was going to end with zombies, not fighting over toilet paper. I mean, you know, our sense of humor helped us through. People made personal discoveries about themselves. I, for one, am thrilled by all these people who are saying, I'm not going back to a crap job that pays very little. I'm stopping to rethink my life and rethink what I'm going to do with it. To me, that's one of the most thrilling things that's happening, even as it personally impacts me when restaurants I go to only don't have everything on the menu I'm used to or whatever. I'm thrilled knowing that people are rethinking their lives based on, you know, COVID. So I think, you know, I will put my money on us, even against all the things that are going to happen on the planet. We are a smart, flexible, resilient race. But never forget, with Gilligan's Island, it wasn't Mr. Howell that made a difference. It really was the professor. It's the people that are smart, flexible, and adaptable that keep everybody else going. So my goal is to help the younger generation, your son and his daughter, and my nephews and nieces and their kids, really recognize that a defeatist attitude is not taking you anyplace. We need you to be smart and flexible and optimistic and taking the steps that we know we can all take to make survival a reality. And I do believe, even though a horrendous amount of people will be lost, a larger amount will still survive, and the new normal will be perfectly fine with them. We're the ones who say, oh my God, what if my son doesn't have a split level with 4 bedrooms and 2 baths? What if he can't have a deck? They're not necessarily saying that. They're already kind of rejecting that idea. So they're already figuring it out, that it's going to be a much more flexible, easygoing lifestyle, a lot less driven by capitalistic goals and ambitions. And that's not only okay, that's actually good. I don't think we necessarily have to be going to the Hunger Games. And my heroine and her son are normal, average people. They're not heroes. They're not necessarily the nicest people. They're not mean, but they're average Joes. people have said to me, I recognize myself in them, and that's what I wanted. These are just average Joes. If I were in the Hunger Games, I'd be the first person dead. That would be a very short book. I love the Hunger Games, but I can't identify with Katniss. I'm not good at fighting. I can't, I'm not the plucky heroine. What I'm saying is everybody can be successful in a climate change world by being flexible, maintaining a sense of humor, maintaining a sense of optimism, and but being very clear-eyed about what's happening and rolling with it, not clinging to what used to work, but rolling with the new normal and not constantly thinking about what's the new normal. A lot of people did that during COVID, and I was really impressed with that. There were constant articles, people like you and me constantly saying, what am I willing to give up forever? If this is the new normal, how is it changing me, and how is it changing what I'm, willing to do and who I am? And I think those of us that did that did pretty well during COVID. And a surprising number of people did do that. And I think we'll be the same with climate change. People will be saying, this is the new normal. I see how things have changed. I see there's 3 feet in my, ground floor. So I'm not rebuilding here. And wherever I do rebuild, I'm going to be 3 feet higher. And, just accepting that my life is changing. I need to let go of what isn't working now and, really build forward on what will work. I personally would probably not, I have a nice house, but I personally probably wouldn't be building one or buying one. I would be really thinking about a more flexible nomadic lifestyle. And I may, be doing that before long anyway, but I think if we can, accept the way things are changing and say, and how am I going to change to adapt to it? Being the English drinking tea at 4 p.m. in the afternoon in 110 degrees in Africa is not a good strategy. It's not the way we should adapt to climate change.
You're so right on, and I'm taken away and looking while you're talking about COVID and how we all. I used to drive my car. Not that I drove it a lot, but I was doing 12,000 miles a year for the last 10 years, and COVID redirected that so that I put on 2,000 or 3,000 miles a year. So I cut down my driving 75%. And guess what?
You don't miss it.
I don't miss it. There's nothing, no place, there's nothing I was denied if I wanted. I mean, there's nothing I had to do. I didn't need to run and drive 80 miles to go out to eat. I mean, it's so, but it redirected my whole perspective on things, and I readapted to doing my journalism by sitting in this wonderful chair, which I've worn out, by the way.
Yeah, it's tilting a little bit, I can see.
Oh yeah, so and the cushion's completely worn out down to the 2 years. I worn it, and I think that's great. What did I do during the pandemic? I wore out my chair. So this is a great, the last, because you and I will talk through Climate Optimists regularly and often, and we will be sharing that with the audiences here. So you and I, it's an ongoing, continuing thing. But just to kind of wrap this up, because we could talk for a long time, and we will. A future think for Grace Agnew, your future plans. I know there's more of this coming, correct?
Yes, I'm working on a sequel to that, but I actually had another idea for another book, so I'm actually kind of juggling 2 right now. But I am working on the sequel of Sanctuary and continuing to explore how average people are going to survive and even thrive during climate change. And I think it's really important. I don't want people to think I have a Pollyanna view of climate change. I hope I've described enough to show that I really think it's going to be pretty horrendous, but I'm still betting on us. And I'm still saying that you can do fine in climate change if you're flexible, open, and proactive. you're going to have to come together to fight climate change. We have to force our politicians to do the right things. We can mitigate climate change, and we have to do that. But there are some processes that are in motion, and our planet is going to be different. But we can persist, and we can also find happy lives within the moments that, each day gives us, regardless of what's going on to the planet. So, I don't want people to just either drown in denial, because then nothing gets changed, or drown in despair. And particularly, I don't want the young saying, I'm robbed of a future. No, you're going to have a different future, but in many ways, it's going to be a rather adventurous, exciting future, maybe more adventurous and exciting than you had hoped for.
Right.
And you don't have to be a Katniss who can use a bow and arrow with great effect to do well in climate change. It really is more about attitude and being willing to do what you can. So I just don't want to see people dissolve into despair. It's not necessary. We were all told if we ever had a major viral outbreak that we would devolve into, Lord of the Flies, and we'd all be killing each other off. And instead, we were simply joking about toilet paper. So, we are actually, and we also developed vaccines in record time. Yes, there's a percentage of people who refuse to take them, but the reality is those vaccines are going to save us, and they were developed in record time. We are a smart species. We can survive climate change, but we can't do it by giving in to despair. So that's why I will always be an optimist, and I am a climate optimist.
Perfect.
So that's what I would say is the most. And so the other book I'm writing is actually a young adult novel. It's based on, I wrote a heated defense on Facebook for Mark Twain, who I think is one of the greatest writers of the world, and certainly my choice for greatest American writer. And so I'm doing and I think his book, The Adventures of Huck Finn, is the great anti-slavery novel of all time. So I'm also writing a young adult novel. It came to me in a dream, and it was so vivid, I got up and started writing, that I'm calling Finn, which is kind of a modern day Huckleberry Finn, about this climate refugee boy who's, going through the flooded parts of the United States, on his raft, because, frankly, you will be lucky to have those. And I want to encapsulate in that novel the optimism and resiliency that youth are going to need to be in a climate change world. But I don't want people to feel like there's the cliff, we're running toward it, we all jump into darkness now, boom, it's over. Nothing other than the asteroid that took out the dinosaurs has ever caused that level of cataclysm. We have centuries ahead of us, but they may not be the centuries that went before. But on the other hand, I think capitalism has certainly played out, and I don't think that as a societal driver that's a sustainable way to live. So it will be, I hope you and I live long enough to see the sorts of new, more communal, more collaborative world that's actually going to survive and even thrive in climate change.
Great way to end this particular interview. Perfect way. To quote a character in one of my favorite movies, Norma Ray, when Ron Liebman says to Sally Field, Norma Ray at the end, what we've had has been sumptuous. So that's a great way to close this. It popped into my head. This has been sumptuous, and for me, the good news is we're going to be plodding on and doing our stuff for a long time, because we're on the same wavelength.
We are now. We're like, you're like one male version of me, and I'm the female version of you.
Yeah, we're on so many ways.
Attitude, geography is destiny, attitude is destiny, and we have to have the young generation feeling optimistic about what they can do, because they can do a lot.
They sure can, and it's their world, and
right.
You've embraced that at Rutgers, and I've embraced it a little bit now in teaching. And listen, I taught at Rutgers which was one of the great experiences of my life to have done that.
Yes.
It's so off the charts. And so many of the interviews I do here on Conversation with Calvin are with Gen Z and many Rutgers young people. So we're on the same wavelength. To be continued is the best way to say this. And I thank you so much.
This was a lot of fun. I'm glad we did it.
It
Yeah.
is a lot of fun. And it's going to continue to be a lot of fun.
Yes, it
So we're
is.
signing
Yes.
off just briefly. We'll be back,
We'll be
in the
back.
next week
Yeah.
or so. You know, like the Terminator, I'll be back kind of thing. But anyway, thank you, Grace, and I will see you
Sure, I
soon.
enjoyed it.
Okay,
See you
bye-bye.
soon. Yes, bye.